Hi guys, I'm James Watson, and today we're going to talk about the adaptations that our body makes to resistance training. Alright, come with me and we're going to learn about this stuff. Alright, so today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about how the nervous, the muscular, the skeletal, and how our endocrine system responds to mechanical load and how it responds to resistance training and exercise. We're also going to discuss a little bit on why these adaptations matter and why our body makes these adaptations in order to maintain and maybe even increase our mechanical load. So let's get into it. We're going to start off today by talking a little bit about the physiological background of these things. So first off, one back pocket knowledge that we should know is that maximal force is how much force that our muscle can make for a 1 rep maximum. So what we'll see is that as we generate force, it's going to create this thing, and it's just however much force that we can create for exactly 1 rep of an exercise and not anything more than that. The second thing that we're going to talk about is how endurance work as well. So what we're going to be doing is just the repeated work of a certain muscle and the repeated contractions of that muscle is just going to be what we call endurance. And it's just basically how many times we can contract a certain muscle before we actually fatigue that muscle. Another thing is that we have 2 different types of muscle fibers. We have type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. So type 2 muscle fibers produce a lot more force than type 1 muscle fibers. So a good way to remember it is type 1 muscle fibers, it has to do with more endurance exercises, and type 2 fibers has to do with more maximal force exercises. Another thing that we're going to be looking at is how our neurons respond to these things. So the CNS signal that we get from it, or the signal that we get from our central nervous system, actually drives our early strength gains. And so all those gains that we see in those first 2 to 6 weeks are actually going to come more from our neuromuscular connection than actual strength. One key thing that we're going to remember here is that resistance training is a signal to our body, okay? The nervous system reads that signal first, and then our body's going to respond to that signal. And this has everything to do with what we're going to be talking about today. So general principles of our resistance training, right? We're going to talk about some neural adaptation and how we recruit our muscles, how our muscles synchronize with the nervous system. We're also going to be talking about muscle hypertrophy and how we get size from muscle. Hypertrophy is just the increase of muscle size. We're also going to talk about how bones and tendons adapt to mechanical stress, mechanical load, and how hormones support recovery and remodeling of our body. Detraining or atrophy is actually going to reverse all of these adaptations. And so we're going to go into a little bit about what atrophy is and what we can be doing to avoid that as well. All right, let's get into it. So strength gains before size gains. As we talked about, the nervous system is actually going to have a lot more to do with the strength that we have in our body during those first 2 to 6 weeks of training. So beginners, they gain strength a lot during these first 2 to 6 because we're actually going to be working on the efficiency of our neuromuscular system. So the neurons are going to be activating, they're going to be synchronizing, and they're going to be able to contract the muscle with a lot more force than it was able to before as it adapts to this new system, to this new training. The firing of the neurons becomes faster, it becomes more synchronized, and our neuromuscular efficiency is actually going to improve. So we're going to have a little bit less antagonist co-contraction, and we're going to be able to use those muscles a lot more efficiently than we would have if we didn't have that neuromuscular connection. So this is something key, that strength before size, okay? Hypertrophy. Now we're going to get into muscle size. So type 2 fibers are actually going to have a lot more of that force production, okay? A lot more of that size. Type 1 fibers are a lot thinner, a lot smaller than those type 2 fibers. Type 2 fibers that are going to produce a lot more muscle protein synthesis, which is key for muscle recovery, for muscle size as well. And those fibers, it's actually going to shift to preserve the fatigue resistant stuff. So our type 2 fibers have 2 general types of muscle fibers. It's going to be type 2X and type 2A. Type 2X is just our standard type 2 muscle fibers. But as we train, we're going to be able to have a little higher endurance. We're going to be able to contract those muscles for longer periods of time. And that's going to transition. That's because of that transition from our type 2X to our type 2A fibers. It has more of a fatigue resistance. So all of this actually is going to result in a greater force production. So as we train, as our muscles get bigger, we're actually going to be able to generate more force, and therefore we're going to be able to move a lot more weight as well. So the net effect, as I have written up there, the more force, the better fatigue resistance in the same fiber pool. So that's those type 2 fibers. Moving on, we also have bone and tendon growth. So what's going to go down is our bones and tendons are actually going to remodel themselves as we train, as we put it under mechanical tension, as we place it under mechanical load as well. Our tendons are actually going to increase the collagen synthesis inside of it, and that's going to increase the stiffness of our tendons as well. And that all has to do with how we're going to be reacting, how we're going to be actually driving our muscles in a certain direction. So tendons are extremely important. And as we have stiffer tendons, we're actually going to be able to transfer force from muscle to bone with more efficiency and with more force output as well. Another thing is that our bone is actually going to remodel under load as well. So our osteoblast activity, remember that word osteoblast, is going to increase as we increase our exercise and our resistance training as well. So these adaptations are really just to make those bones a lot more dense and to reduce the risk of fracture as we continue to place our bones under mechanical tension and load. These adaptations improve the force transfer. They reduce the risk of fracture. It's extremely important that our body has this adaptation so that we can continue to train without injuring ourselves, without breaking anything, without fracturing anything as well. One thing to remember is that connective tissue is a lot slower to adapt than muscle. So the connective tissue is going to take a lot longer to be able to remodel itself, to be able to have this remodeling than our muscle. So you'll see a lot more muscle size than that bone density. So that's important when we're coming to some sort of training protocol. Make sure that you increase the load very slowly so as to not increase the risk of an injury to your tendons or your ligaments at all. Another thing that we're going to be talking about is the recovery window. All right, so this has everything to do with the chemicals inside of our body, the endocrine system. This has to do with the hormones such as testosterone, growth hormone, IGF-1. All these things support adaptation. Another thing that we're going to notice is that cortisol is actually going to increase during strenuous training. And so this is a catabolic effect, or it's going to break down the muscles. While hormones such as testosterone, growth hormone, and IGF-1, all of these things are anabolic things, and they're here to build our muscles as well. So our muscle protein synthesis is going to peak around 24 hours after our workout, and it's going to continue at elevated levels for up to 48 hours after that workout as well. So the growth that we see in our muscles, in our bones, in everything is actually going to happen during the recovery. So that's the importance of taking rest days, and so that we can actually recover, so that we can actually continue to build that muscle, build that strength, and reduce the risk of our injury, and allow for these hormones to do their job. So this is the important part about it, of making sure that we get that, because the growth happens during the recovery, not during the actual training itself. Speaking of training, we're going to talk a little bit about the detraining as well, the atrophy of our muscle fibers. So as we stop training, the signal's actually going to reverse. All right, it's not an immediate effect. The first thing that you're going to be seeing is a lot of neuromuscular activation decline. So our neurons are going to fire with less efficiency. It's going to lose that synchronization that had built up over the years. And that's where we're going to see some of our strength. But the muscle size is actually going to take a little bit longer, and it would require a lot longer of a period in order to see actual loss of muscle fibers. But these adaptations reverse completely when we stop training. So it's important to maintain a consistent schedule. Our protein synthesis is also going to decline just because of the lack of the tension signal. Our muscle protein synthesis is actually just going to completely fall. Our muscle size will eventually decline. But one thing to remember, this is the silver lining of the whole thing, is that our muscle memory is actually something that's going to affect us a lot. So as we stop training, if someone left on a mission for 2 years, what's going to happen is they're going to lose a lot of that muscle. They're going to lose a lot of that training, that, efficiency that they had before. But because of muscle memory, we're actually going to be able to return back to whatever we were before a lot faster than if we were starting from a baseline without any athletic background at all. And so that retraining process is going to take it's going to be a lot faster than what it would be without it. Continuing, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about current research, right? What the literature is saying right now. So hypertrophy improves the glucose regulation of our bodies. high velocity training or training that has explosive, a lot of force output. It's going to increase the bone mineral density of our bodies. This is extremely important with geriatric populations because it's actually going to help them move around a lot better than if they weren't training at all. Immobilization is going to actually have an extreme effect on the muscle atrophy. So if we're not moving our muscles at all, that's going to atrophy the muscle, and that's going to be very bad for anybody who likes to look big. Another thing is that our muscle functions just as a hormone regulation thing. So it's that 24 to 48 hours peak as it stays elevated. And so we actually need those muscles because as we have more muscle, we're going to be able to metabolize a lot more substrates in our body. And because of all of that, we're going to be able to burn more fats and appear pretty massive and pretty big, you know? Another thing is just velocity does matter a lot. It's not just the load of the muscle. It's the velocity of the muscle that we're actually going to be looking at. So how fast we're doing a rep, how long we're maintaining a contraction for. These are all key things that we have to look at when we're building a training protocol for somebody. And just remember that strength does precede the size. That is that first thing. And so we already talked a little bit about that stuff, but yeah, so as we increase the hypertrophy of something, we're going to be able to regulate our glucose a lot better. The high velocity training has everything to do with the bone mineral density. The velocity is extremely important. It's not just the load. And yeah, so this is all extremely important stuff that exercise scientists are actually looking into. And this is all current research that has been released in the past 2 years. All right, guys, so let's talk about who actually needs all this information that we covered today. So as we get into this, we're going to be talking about what the actual purpose of all of these things is. So first off, we're going to talk about the geriatric population, older adults. So this is actually going to combat something called sarcopenia, and that's something that's just going to reduce the risk of injury. As we train, we're going to be able to increase the bone density. We're going to be able to help them move a lot better in a safe manner and just have a higher quality of life as well. It's going to help them preserve their own independence. Athletes, obviously, they're going to want to train using resistance training because what that's going to do is going to improve the injury resilience. It's going to improve force production and the endurance as well of whatever event they're trying to do. Another important thing that a lot of people don't think about is in chronic disease patients. So as we talked about, as we increase muscle mass, our hormone response is actually going to increase as well. And what that's going to do is it's going to increase our glucose control as well, our body composition, our overall health. So we're going to be able to reduce the amount of visceral fat. We're going to be able to increase the amount of muscles that we have. And because of this, increase the hormone response as well and just allow for a very healthy, balanced body. So this would definitely help someone with, say, diabetes. As they increase muscle mass, they can be able to improve that glucose regulation and just help them have a safe life and a healthy lifestyle as well. Other things is post-op and rehab, right? After a surgery, they're going to be getting up from a bed. They're going to have a lot of muscle atrophy. They're not going to have a lot of neuromuscular efficiency or adaptations. And so what we can do is by introducing resistance training to them, it can help them actually regain function. And they could go back to being just as healthy or even healthier than they were before that surgery or before that operation. So coaches, therapists, exercise physiologists, physicians, dietitians, they all apply these principles when they're making the protocols for their own patients. As they continue to do these things, they're going to be able to improve the quality of life of these certain individuals, and they're going to be able to help them out in their own lifestyle. So let's get into it. Oh, that's embarrassing. Turn that off. Okay, so some 5 things to remember. All right. Is the early strength gains are completely neural. It's that 5 to 6 weeks that we're going to have, right? It's the muscle recruitment, it's the rate coding, it's the synchronization of those muscles. The type 2 fibers, they're going to drive a lot more of the hypertrophy. It's going to increase the muscle size. That's extremely important. If someone's trying to get extremely big, it's going to focus more on those type 2 fibers and training plans that's going to increase those things as well. Your tendons and your bones, they're going to adapt to that load, to that tension as well. So as we adapt to it, it's going to increase the osteoblast activity inside of our body. And what that's going to do is that's going to help us be able to maintain all of the stresses that we're putting onto our body during high intensity exercise. Another thing is that our muscle protein synthesis is going to generally peak around 24 hours, but it's going to stay elevated from 24 hours to 48 hours after that exercise. And so that's extremely important when we're talking about muscle repair, because of that protein is going to be going into it and it's going to be synthesizing all of that. Another thing is that detraining is actually going to reverse all of that, but muscle memory is our hope. It's that silver lining. Even if we do get detrained, even if we do experience that atrophy, what that's going to be doing is it's just going to increase the amount of, or decrease the amount of time it's going to take to be able to return back to our original state. So if you guys think you understand it, let's test it. What we're going to do is we're going to go over 5 questions to test what you guys have been learning. So first question is, which adaptation is primarily responsible for early strength gains during the first several weeks of resistance training? A, muscle hypertrophy, B, increased bone mineral density, C, neural adaptations, or D, increased tendon stiffness. Now, if you chose C, neural adaptations, you were correct. Good job. Now, which muscle fiber types experiences the greatest hypertrophy and force production adaptations from resistance training? A, type 1 fibers, B, type 2A fibers, C, cardiac muscle fibers, or D, smooth muscle fibers. Now, if you chose B, type 2A fibers, you were correct. Type 2A fibers is what experiences the most hypertrophy and the force production adaptations during training. Muscle protein synthesis generally peaks approximately blank after a resistance training session. A, immediately after exercise, B, 6 hours after exercise, or B, 6 hours after exercise, C, 24 hours after exercise, or D, 7 days after exercise. Now, if you chose C, 24 hours after exercise, you were correct. That's generally when it peaks, and it stays elevated for up to 48 hours after exercise. Now, according to Wolff's Law, or that bone mineral density that we were talking about, resistance training increases bone mineral density primarily by stimulating A, osteoclast activity, B, motor unit recruitment, C, satellite cell proliferation, or D, osteoblast activity. And remember, we're talking about the bones here. And if you chose D, osteoblast activity, you were correct. Osteoblast is something that builds our muscle, or builds our bones, and increases the density of those things as well. Osteoclasts are going to help with that process, but osteoblasts are the ones that are actually going to be doing that production. Now, which muscle fibers atrophy most quickly during prolonged inactivity? A, type 1 fibers, B, type 2 fibers, C, cardiac fibers, or D, smooth muscle fibers. Now, if you chose B, type 2 fibers, you are correct. Those are the ones that atrophy most quickly during prolonged inactivity. It's going to go from being fatigue resistant to more fatigable. Now, these are the resources that were used for this presentation. I'd like to thank all of you guys for watching. I'd like to thank as well the participation of my cameraman, Hudson Lee, and shout out to everybody who also participated in the making of this video. Thank you guys so much. Have a nice day.